Weekdays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibbert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studios, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. Morning there, Rhino.
Howdy, howdy.
I presume that you were spared of the ravage of the storms that swept through the Magnolia State once again.
I was spared the ravage, but I wasn't spared the rain.
Okay. It
was raining sideways when I was going to bed last night.
Torrents, was it not? Oh, man. Well, there's trees down all over the place, debris, and folks without power once again, right? I think we got going on.
Oh, yeah.
We kick off the program and the week, the last one in the month of June, the halfway point of the year, with State Auditor Shad White. Good morning there, Mr. Auditor.
Morning,
thanks
brother.
for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
So you have been doing a little work investigating the ratcheting up, shall we say, of these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that really happening and pervading every corner of society.
Yep.
But it's fair to say ground zero for that is the higher ed environment.
Yep.
And we're seeing that even here in the great state of Mississippi. You did a little digging, your office did, on that, and you found some things going on that you think the taxpayers needed to know about, so you put a report together.
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
You're exactly right, Gerard. So nationwide, you've seen studies and exposés of DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion, and a lot of those exposés have shown that big companies, I'll use an example, Coca-Cola, have DEI trainings where they're telling employees to, quote, be less white. Their words, not my words.
Yep.
So this is obviously highly controversial. And the thing I notice over and over again is people assume that when they read about this stuff happening in other places in the country, they assume that that is not happening here in Mississippi. And I'm here to tell you, there's always a chance that something like that is happening here in Mississippi, especially if you're talking about DEI trainings at universities, because our universities are not immune from the same sorts of temptations and faculty types that you see at the University of Minnesota or the University of Ohio State University or wherever it may be. So we started doing some digging, to your point, and we looked at our public universities in Mississippi, and we wanted to know how much they were spending on DEI initiatives, and I wanted to know more specifically how much they're spending out of taxpayer dollars, your money, if you're listening out there and paying taxes in Mississippi, how much they were spending out of your money on DEI initiatives. The answer is between 2019 and today, our public universities spent about $23 million on DEI. Out of your money, that's about $11 million state taxpayer dollars. And so then the follow-on question, of course, is, all right, well, what's that money going for? What are we paying for? Well, one thing that we found initially was we're definitely not paying for a ton of scholarships for kids coming from impoverished environments. You know, if the goal is to recruit and retain a diverse student body at our public universities, you would think you would want a bunch of money to go to, I don't know, call me crazy, say scholarships for kids coming from poor neighborhoods. But that's not what the money is really going for. 70% of the dollars this past year went to pay for salaries for DEI staff at public universities. And then people ask the next question, which is, what are those folks doing? What are the adults doing? What trainings are they running? What seminars are they putting on? How are they spending my money? And what are they using that money to teach to impressionable 18-year-olds who are going to our universities?
So, you know, Rhino and I have talked about this quite a bit and have done some research on that. Rhino, I think it was you who came across some information that said, I'm trying to remember, it was the Ohio
State University.
Yeah. Like 132 people
167
in their DEI organization.
Yeah.
And these are not inexpensive staff either.
No.
These are highly compensated individuals.
Yes.
We also learned that at the University of Michigan, more in the DEI department than in the history department in the liberal arts school, which is crazy. And then there are, you and I were talking about this before we came on the show, in states that we typically think about being red and perhaps immune from this sort of stuff. Florida, the University of Florida, unbelievable expose on the University of Florida and their adoption of DEI, including in their admissions in their medical school. which is ridiculous.
Yep.
So also Texas A&M, another institution. You wouldn't think you'd find this sort of stuff. It's pervasive. Let's be honest. And it's happening here in Mississippi.
That's right.
So for the benefit of our audience, Mr. Auditor, help us understand the breakdown of the revenue picture for a public university. How much comes from the state? How much comes from tuition, grants, et cetera, other sources? And then with respect to state funds over which you're responsible for ensuring they are properly accounted for and spent, is there any sort of state stipulation on how that money can be spent?
That's a great question. So the percentage of an institution's money that's coming from the state varies by the institution, depends on things like how successful they are at fundraising on their own and that sort of thing. So you might say, okay, well, some of our institutions, less than a fourth of their revenue is coming from state taxpayers. But the real question at the end of that, second question that you asked is, okay, well, if they spend any funds or they spend taxpayer dollars in a way that clearly conflicts with the values of Mississippi voters and taxpayers, what can be done?
Right.
What happens at the end of it? Well, one of two things. Either they have spent money in a way that's illegal, and my office can get involved and can say, no, you're not allowed to do that. We can issue demands on the university or the people who benefited, and they have to pay that money back. But in this case, in the case of DEI, there's nothing illegal about them spending that money.
Right.
So really part of the purpose of this study was to say, all right, taxpayers, look, here's where your money's going, some of your money. And just like in Florida, where last year they discovered that taxpayer dollars were going through their public universities to pay for DEI, we need to make a decision now. Taxpayers need to make a decision about whether or not they're comfortable with their money going toward this. And if they are, then fine, move on your way, have a great day. If you're not comfortable with it, you need to call your legislator and ask them to pass similar legislation that's been passed in other states, which demands that taxpayer dollars not be used on DEI initiatives or initiatives that make folks uncomfortable because they're carrying a message that we don't want our young people being exposed to, at least not through the subsidy of taxpayer dollars. Somebody asked me this the other day. They said, wait a minute, I thought that universities were the place where ideas, including ideas that may be controversial, are supposed to be debated. And I said, 100% they are. I went to Harvard Law School, and I took a class where I had to read the Communist Manifesto, and the same day we had to read Road to Serfdom by Hayek, two diametrically opposed viewpoints, right? That's fine. That's okay. But you should not be at a public university using taxpayer dollars to promote one position over all the others. And that's what DEI does. That's the danger there.
But in your experience, though, that you just discussed at Harvard, being assigned to read those two really diametrically opposed philosophies, if you will, that makes total sense. And then you make your own decision. But when it gets to the point where there's preferential treatment or it's just skewed in one direction and there's special accommodations made for certain groups, that's when it becomes a problem.
That's right.
Or when we start putting one's physical, immutable traits in operational policies, admissions, compensation, promotion, hiring, a job assignment, that becomes a problem because that shouldn't enter into it. What I would like to propose to you that I'd like to see happen, if I were in charge, this is what I would do at a university. I'd eliminate the DEI departments. What I would create is what I would call a department of exclusion. And their job would be to find, identify, locate, ensure that there are no exclusionary practices happening. We don't exclude anybody based on their sex, their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their national origin, those sorts of immutable character. We don't exclude, but we don't give you preferential treatment either. I mean, that's what makes sense to me.
I'll give you another example of a way to handle this if you're at a university and they're not doing this. So one thing that we found is the University of Mississippi, again, my alma mater, I love Ole Miss.
And mine.
University of Mississippi used a DEI staffer to build an event to promote a book. The book is called How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's by Ibram Kendi. I've read it. It is hot garbage is a nice way of saying it, I guess. One of the core tenets of the book is this idea, again, his words, not mine, the only remedy to past discrimination is current discrimination. Okay, so now we have a university event promoting this idea. If they wanted to have balance, they could have another conservative author, let's say Heather McDonald, who could come on and say, look, I understand his points, but we need to talk about how, let's say, affirmative action and some of the things that you're proposing, current discrimination, actually hurts the body of young doctors that are going to go through our medical school, because that should be based on merit and not something else. You could have divergent viewpoints being debated at a university, but that's not what's going on. What's going on is the use of taxpayer dollars to promote one side of that story, not both.
It's wrong. We got Auditor Shad White. You can hang around.
Sure, of course.
We got Auditor Shad White in the Element Wealth Studios this morning. Getting pretty fired up today. Coming right back after the break. Back, everyone. We've got Auditor Shad White in the Element Wealth Studios. So you were talking about Coca-Cola, and I told you, and I've told the audience before, I'm actually a plaintiff in a class action lawsuit. Mm-hmm. And it's not because we're mad that they're adopting all these ESG and DEI programs. It's because that in doing so, are you abdicating your fiduciary responsibility as a company, as a board, as management, to produce maximum returns for investors? We've gotten to the point where this social justice stuff seems to trump just good old-fashioned profit. No profit, no jobs, no innovation, no wealth creation, no societal progress.
People want to know, too, why is this happening? I think a lot of folks who are used to an America where this is not going on are taken aback by this. They're surprised that this is seeping into our culture, that's seeping through our corporations. They don't understand. And I'm here to tell you that the world is different today than it ever has been in the history of American capitalism.
No doubt.
So think about the 1960s. In the 1960s, you had hippies who were socially liberal, but they were really diametrically opposed to most of the corporate leadership in America at the same time. So really,
the establishment, they call it.
The establishment, right? So they really didn't have as much power as they could have if they had captured the commanding heights of all the biggest businesses. That's not what's happening today. What's happening today is that the social radicals have also captured the commanding heights of the biggest businesses in the world. And people want to know why. I'm here to tell you why. It's because those folks get indoctrinated at our universities, and I've been through several of our universities, 3 of them, in the last 20 years. They get indoctrinated in these universities, and then they're the ones who get hired as corporate executives to run the biggest companies in the world.
That's where they get trained.
That's where they get trained. And so if you look, this goes back to also the death of religion in America. If you look at a lot of these folks who are pushing this agenda, the thing that they believe in most is social justice. They've been trained in the universities. This is their highest held value. And yes, they go into corporate America to make a good paycheck for their families, and maybe they like the idea of business. But once they get there, they take those values with them, and they see this as a golden opportunity to sing from the hymnal that is their church, that came from their church. And so they start doing that at the biggest businesses, and people are shocked when they look up and they see that Bud Light's doing something that they don't agree with. You could not imagine a company like that in the 1960s doing something that would offend all of their consumers or their shareholders, but that's not what's going on right now. And so we really need visibility inside these big companies, but if you want to get at the root of the problem, you have to stop the indoctrination of 18-year-olds going into our universities who are impressionable, who are listening to a bunch of nonsense from professors that, and sometimes are being subsidized with taxpayer dollars.
Unfortunately, it's a pipeline. It's a conduit straight from the classroom, straight from those indoctrination centers, which is really what they are. They're supposed to be the laboratory of diverse thought, right? That was the purpose of a college education, just like you said. You got Ibram Kendi's book. And then what was the other one you got?
Heather McDonald would be
book.
A great book to juxtapose and put it against it.
Yes.
But that's not happening.
No, it's not. And she wrote one I shared with you before we came on the program called The Diversity Delusion. I think it's about 5 years old. And it's awesome. And it's her experience traveling around, speaking on college campuses, many times getting shouted down to the point where she just had to close up the speech and exit, which is ridiculous. So much for the tolerant left, I guess. They don't like what they're hearing.
That's right.
It's just incredible, but you're right. I think it's ground zero. And now what we're seeing is that it's matriculating down even below that into the K through 12 space.
Big time. Ibram Kendi has written a baby book That's a version of his How to Be an Anti-Racist book. So the same book that they're promoting at this DEI event at the University of Mississippi has a version for kids, babies. And so you have to realize that the project of the left is to get into kids' heads as early as possible to make sure that they have this pipeline of people who believe what they believe because they feel morally called to promote this worldview. And what you and I know, and probably most of your listeners know, is that this worldview can destroy our country if we're not careful. It can destroy it. So we have to be willing to push back. And look, in order to push back, you are going to have to face some personal costs. So for me, I have people who are lifelong friends who will tell me they'll never be friends with me again for simply pointing out what's happening at our universities, for simply showing them the dollars and cents of how much is going to DEI. But the point for me is that I have 3 kids. I would love for those 3 kids to go to a university here in Mississippi, but I have to do everything in my power while I'm in a position of influence to stop those universities from breaking under the weight of their own agendas. That's the goal. That's the big picture goal. And that, to me, those 3 kids, those kids are far more important to me than any other relationships that I will burn in the process or anybody that I'll make mad politically or anybody who gets uncomfortable with me just pointing out the facts. That's not the priority. The priority has to be about the future and the kind of state we're going to leave.
I can't tell you the number of contemporaries I have, auditor, who have kids like me, who are in their 20s, early 30s, and especially if they have multiple, and they'll say, yeah, one of them just went awry, and they can't explain it, why they just went far left liberal loony.
Yep.
And it's because they went to school.
That's right.
That's what happened, and they ate it up. And the left says, oh, no, we're not grooming. But grooming doesn't necessarily just exclusively apply to grooming some sort of sexual orientation or acceptance of sexual deviancy, honestly. It also means grooming to buy into this whole idea of putting diversity, if you will, in these physical traits above merit.
Yep.
That's a grooming as well that's going on.
That's right. The framework that they use is oppressor-oppressed.
Yes.
They want to teach young people that they need to think about the world in terms of oppressors and oppressed, and to always try to find the oppressed person.
That's right.
And the better you are at finding somebody who's being oppressed, the better you are at this game, and the smarter you are, and the more compassionate you are. And that is dangerous, and I'll tell you why it's dangerous, because it teaches people to think of others and themselves as victims first. And this is not how you build humans who are self-confident, who can set goals for themselves, who believe they can achieve their goals. It is not how you promote human flourishing. We should be telling folks that you can achieve what you want to if you're willing to work hard and fight through adversity. And things are not going to work out every time, but that does not mean that there's some magical oppressive system that is holding everybody back. Your job is to fight for the goals that you set for yourself. And that is a message that I think humans want to grab onto. But we have to have an equal seat at the table telling an 18-year-old that version of the truth or the truth and combating the version that's coming from the left. And we don't have that at universities right now.
They're not getting balance. It's interesting you say that. It made me think about Tim Scott's recent appearance on The View, where he basically had to explain to the people on The View, hey, look, I'm here. If you say all this is going on, how the heck did I get here? So, which is just a great point. It's a grievance industry is what I call it. It seems like it. And it's a shakedown to a great extent. It has given rise to just a giant complex of consulting organizations, all of whom come calling, highly compensated people, by the way, that are doing this sort of stuff. And what they're peddling is, as you said, hot garbage. I shared on the program perhaps the first story I think I ever shared about this going back to 2020 in the wake of the George Floyd incident, which really saw this take hold in corporate America in particular. So Sandia Labs, wanted to share this with you. Sandia National Laboratories, this is the contractor that builds the U.S. nuclear weapon arsenal. So
I'm already terrified where the story is going.
They take all their people offsite, their management team offsite, for a week of so-called DEI training. This is back in 2020. And the participants were told that the roots of white male culture consist of rugged individualism, a can-do attitude, hard work, and striving towards success. They are, in fact, the consultants teach, devastating to women and people of color.
Oh, gosh.
So striving towards success, and you're building nuclear weapons? Help me with that one.
Well, think about if you're a woman who is a manager at that company, you just had somebody tell you that taking ownership of your life and showing up on time and working hard is a dude thing. How insulting is that?
Crazy.
It's insulting to the very people that they claim to be wanting to help. And that's the crazy thing here, is that this ideology is dangerous, and as long as we can have a debate about it, we're going to win. We just need an even playing field. We need folks who are willing to step up and talk about this and debate folks head on the other side, and that's how you win. That's how you win the hearts and minds of people who are growing up right now.
The idea is to give the students all the ideas from the spectrum of ideas, and then let them discern and decide. That's
Bingo.
how you learn how to critically think.
Bingo.
If you can hang, we'll talk some more. We got Auditor Shad White in the Element Well studio. Studios with Auditor Shad White. So I share this with you. I have been a subscriber to Harvard Business Review. Fantastic publication for years. I use it in business, get lots of ideas, especially on organizational management.
Yep.
Really, really good pieces there. And a lot of people would be surprised, I think, and you're a graduate there, or alumnus, that especially in the B school, it's all not left-wing wackos over
Correct.
there.
Yeah, correct.
Quite a few aren't.
I went to the law school a little bit further left than the B school, but
the B
you're
school,
right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the content comes from
Yep.
the B school
Yep.
professors. It's excellent. So they also do podcast. I wouldn't call it a podcast, but really it's just recorded interviews with various corporate figures. So I got interested in one that was recorded with Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta. Delta at the time was my largest customer. I said, this ought to be good. I want to hear what we never got to meet the CEO. We dealt with the IT teams. And I'm listening and enjoying it. And about 5 minutes into it, he makes the statement that the only reason he attained that level in this big corporation was because he's a white male. And at that point, I pretty much turned it off. I mean, I'm so disappointed to hear that. Well, gee, Mr. Bastian, do you not think it maybe had a little bit to do with your qualifications, your resume, your experience, your capabilities?
He doesn't believe that, because if he believed that, he would voluntarily step down the moment he
Totally
realized
agree.
that, and
Totally
he would give it to somebody else. But he believes that he's the best person to run the company.
Of course.
And that's why he kept his job.
Of course. So, and that's fine. So who cares?
That's
I mean,
right.
at the end of the day, why are we so wrapped up in Gordian knots over this? I mean, we shouldn't be.
Yep.
Honestly.
And, you know, it's important for society to continue to promote merit. You and I were talking about this. Vivek Ramaswamy is actually a friend of my wife's. He's running for president right now, and he's talked a lot about returning to a culture where we value merit.
Yep.
And the reason that's important, I can't even believe you have to say this out loud, but the reason that's important is if you want the best doctors, if you want the best airline pilots, if you want the best nuclear engineers handling nuclear material, you need to promote on merit.
Yeah.
Period.
And
That's the end of it.
all of that adds up collectively to the best outcomes for society.
Absolutely.
That's where innovation comes from. That's where the quality of life improves when we put people that are the most qualified in positions to make a value contribution.
When the Chinese see us debating DEI, they laugh. And they laugh all the way to the bank, because they know their economy is going to be better, because they're not concerned with that. They know their military is going to be stronger, because they're not concerned with that. They're laughing all the way to the bank when they see us do stuff like this. And so that's why it's important for us to be assertive in making sure that people understand how bad this stuff is, and to be assertive in framing up an argument that counters it. And the thing that, you know, worries me a lot when I talk to other folks who agree with us, so I'll just say, you know, folks who vote in the Republican primary in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Those are folks who generally, I would think, agree with us, Gerard. But I talk to a lot of them, and a lot of them, they'll say stuff like, well, you know, this just isn't the biggest deal in the world, and it's not happening in Mississippi, and this really isn't changing our society all that much, and you just don't need to pay that much attention to this kind of stuff. Read.
It's not true.
Open the newspaper. Read about what's going on at these big companies. at these universities, read about what it's doing to the core institutions of our society, and then come back and tell me if you think it's not that big of a deal.
And I have there are people that listen to our show and text us that work for some of these big companies, and we have a lot of people in Mississippi because we don't have a lot of big corporate headquarters here, but we have a lot of people who work for those companies that reside in Mississippi, and they share some of that stuff. So I saw a report recently that I hope I get this right, but in the K through 12, amongst that age group, that in this country, the most coveted job is to be a YouTube vlogger. Seriously, that ranks at the top.
Disturbing.
In China, it's, I don't know, an engineer or something, something useful to society. And I'm not saying vlogging's not useful, but everybody can't be a vlogger.
Right. The interesting thing here is that, kids have always wanted sort of unobtainable, maybe frivolous things. Like for us growing up, it was being an NFL player, right? Like that was 100% what every little boy wanted to do. Everybody wanted to be a quarterback or a running back or a wide receiver. And of course, none of us achieved that dream. I'm thinking back about my elementary school class. None of us made the NFL. And that's okay to have those kinds of wild and crazy dreams when you're young. But it shows you that young kids are impressionable.
No doubt.
And so the things that they're being taught in the K-12 system and in college are going to shape what they want to be and why they want to do that thing. And if you're telling kids that, there's this horrible oppressive system that we must all strive to overturn, and then, as you're engaging in your career later on, it doesn't matter what you become, you have to help us overturn this system. Some of those kids are going to be interested in corporate finance, and they're going to be interested in corporate management, and they're going to go on to big businesses, and then you have a problem. And then you have a problem because they've been indoctrinated in this belief, and now they're running the biggest businesses in the world, and now they have the capital that those businesses hold at their disposal, and that is dangerous. And I'll just tell you, it's dangerous for the businesses themselves because eventually consumers wake up and push back. I remember two different things. I remember a few years ago, when NFL players started kneeling before the national anthem, I found this truly offensive. As the grandson of two veterans, as somebody who serves in the Mississippi National Guard, I did not think that this was appropriate to do, and I thought that this should be a moment that we're standing unified when the national anthem happened. And people started talking about boycotting the NFL, and that lasted about 3 seconds, and then it went nowhere, right? You're seeing things change, though, because now when Bud Light does something that people find offensive or when Target does something that people find offensive, conservatives are finally realizing, hey, we have to do something, and we have to be unified, and we have to stand up and say something. And even if you get called mean names on Twitter, you have to be willing to stick up for your values, or you are going to be railroaded at every possible turn because the forces that you're going against are far more powerful than they were 5 and 10 and 15 years ago. That's the charge now. That's the mission for us now. Yeah,
agree. So, and one thing we could do as responsible adults where we can is be a counter and just a voice of common sense at the house. The problem we have is way too many single-parent households, fatherless homes. Mississippi doesn't score very well in that category. In fact, last time I looked, we have the highest percentage of children raised in a single-parent home, highest percentage of fatherless homes. I looked at the data. It's actually come down nationwide a little bit since 2012 was where we hit the peak.
Which is great.
Still way too high, though. So, talk about how that impacts society. I know you've taken an interest in this, have written about it, spoken about
it. It is really, really important. We know based on the social science studies of kids who grow up without an engaged father, they're 20 times more likely to go to prison. They're 9 times less likely to graduate from high school. They're 5 times more likely to be in poverty. And you're right. The last time I looked at the stats, and this moves up and down a little bit, but we had the second highest percentage of kids born into single-parent households right behind West Virginia. We're always competing with them for that last spot. And when you fast forward in a kid's life, you see all of these tragic outcomes play out. And so there are two different things that go on. One is that, they're on this path where they can succeed, but it's much more difficult to succeed at your job, finishing your education, all that sort of stuff. But they also don't get the day-to-day mentoring from their parents that teach them soft skills about how to stand up for yourself, how to set goals, how to show up on time, all the things that lead to a normal, healthy adult life. So that goes on. But I think when you're talking about DEI, too, it's important to bear in mind that you have good, stable families with both parents in the household who just don't think that this DEI stuff is a big deal, and they don't ever talk to their kids about what they believe about the world. And they don't talk to their kids in a way that frames up an argument for what the proper values are that they should be thinking about. And then they send their kids off to a private school or maybe even a public school, and then once they go to university, they're in an environment where they can't control the narrative that their kid is hearing, and they haven't prepared them to push back on anything.
Right.
The kid only hears one side of it, and then you wake up and you wonder why your 25-year-old son or daughter doesn't agree with you on anything and seems to be indoctrinated with a set of views that you find completely outside the realm of common sense. It's because we haven't done a good job of preparing ourselves as a society for teaching young people how to think about these things, how to think critically about the world around them, and the debate, to tussle through these ideas and to not accept everything that an adult is telling them.
Yeah, the sad thing is, you want, of course, teach children to respect authority and have some degree of respect for those older than them, adults. But you've also, it's a shame that adults are taking advantage of that.
Yep.
In the K through 12 and in the learning development period of a child's life. But that's exactly what's happening. They're abusing that privilege, if you will, and they take advantage of it. They indoctrinate and they brainwash. But, well, we got to keep talking about this, Mr. Auditor. I know it's important to you. It's important to me, certainly, and a lot of people in the state of Mississippi. It is, unfortunately, going on here. We've got to be vigilant. We've got to report it, expose it. But we got to talk to our legislature about we don't want our money going to this anymore.
And thank you for letting me come on and frame this up and talk to people about what's going on in Mississippi. I appreciate it.
Good to see you. I'm sure we'll see you at the Neshoba County Fair, right?
It'll be hot. I'll be there.
We got had a great talk here with State Auditor Shad White. We're coming right back with more in the Alamo.